And we are back, SportsLine Live. I am Kelly Stewart, joined by Preston Johnson. We're going to talk a little bit of power rankings, my favorite part of Monday. Preston, let's get started. Number 10, Colorado, got bumped up a point to 88 from last week. The Buffs handled Washington State in the second half last week. Now they face a Utah team who's off a bad loss to Oregon. We talk about this all the time. The public tends to overreact to things like that. I know you and I touch on it every week, not to buy too much into one game. But do you think the Buffs are a little overvalued this week?
I actually don't. I'm surprised the number is this low. I think from the beginning of the week, odds makers or even the early bettors were kind of shading this lower because of the spot for Colorado. They're coming off of the big win, and assuming they can beat Utah this Saturday, they go into that Pac-12 championship game that they have on deck. They represent the Pac-12 South Division, something they haven't done in years. So they have that added pressure there. My number, I thought this would be more like 12 or 12 and a half. So the fact that it was 10 and now it's up to 10 and a half, I think it'll keep rising a little bit. So that's kind of my prediction there. I know we were right about the movement in that Colorado Wazoo game last week. So my thoughts are, if you like Utah, I think you can wait. If you want to back Colorado, I would just take the 10 and a half. I don't see this getting, into single digits at all this week. And if so, I'd be shocked. I'd probably have to back Colorado myself.
All right, number 9, Oklahoma. No change from last week, even though they embarrassed West Virginia. I'm surprised to see you didn't move them at all. Also, they're on a bye this week, so not a whole lot to say before they play Oklahoma State in Bedlam next week.
Yeah, I actually laid -3 with Oklahoma, and my number was like 5, and so I thought it was a pretty good spot as well. And then here we are. It's the same rating, even though they stomped them. It closed. I think it really closed 3.5. So it wasn't like it really closed towards my number around 5. And so I didn't downgrade Oklahoma either for that reason. I actually, even though West Virginia looked bad, I actually bumped them up half of a point in my ratings. And you watch the game; it was basically over from the get-go. But West Virginia, they did themselves in. They turned it over twice inside the 5-yard line in a game that could have easily been like 21-14. It was 28-0, and Oklahoma had the ball, and I think they maybe scored a field goal next in 31-0. It just got out of hand immediately, and from that point on, West Virginia actually won the game. They played well in the second half, and they responded. They just too many turnovers early, and they were in spots where they were about to score, and instead Oklahoma went the other way themselves. I wasn't going to bump Oklahoma because the win looked like it was a blowout. It was a blowout, but it was just one game, and if you really watched it closely, that was more West Virginia's doing than Oklahoma. So, funny enough, Oklahoma State upset TCU, upset as far as the point spread's concerned. And so they actually could win the Big 12 title when they play Oklahoma in 2 weeks. So that game against West Virginia we thought was for the Big 12 title, not necessarily. Oklahoma State, if they beat Oklahoma and Norman in 2 weeks, they'll at least share it, and they'll have the head-to-head advantage for the tiebreaker.
All right, number 8, LSU, 89.5, slight downgrade by half a point for the Tigers after losing to Florida last week. This week they do play an A&M team who's dropped 5 straight against the number. Now there are rumors that Coach O may not be the head coach next year. Do you think the Tigers take advantage of an Aggies team who I think is kind of on a downward spiral?
Yeah, they're both kind of now on a downward spiral, which I guess is the tough part. The LSU team, it was such a weird game because they played Florida in a makeup game that was originally scheduled to be played in Gainesville. The Hurricane got that game canceled, and LSU had the advantage of playing at home now, and then they lost the game anyways. And they had a chance at the end, first and goal. They had 4 plays to try to get it in. They couldn't do it, and I think that's why people are calling for Ed Orgeron's number now. 2 weeks ago, he was, everyone's like, we should probably hire him or whatever. So that's just the talk. The fact that they haven't really offered him, or there hasn't been a rumor that he will be extended officially, makes me think that he won't be. So at this point, yeah, you're looking at some of the other names you've heard rumors about. This Thursday, it's tough. I'm pretty sure it's the Thanksgiving game, and they're coming off that loss to Florida, and Texas A&M, as bad as they've been, the backup quarterback is not going to be Trevor Knight, and defensively LSU is really strong. And even in games where your team looks flat or unprepared, I think that generally hurts the offense more than the defense. So this might end up being a game. There's no Leonard Fournette. I think that was announced official this morning for LSU. So it's a game I'd maybe look to play under, if anything. But with everyone hammering it Thursday because it's Thanksgiving and the holiday, You might see that number get inflated just from some over money. So I'm going to wait and see what it's at on Thursday. I haven't even seen the open for that game yet, but Thursday, my play in this game might be the under.
All right. Number 7, Washington. No change from last week. Still sitting at 91 points. We kind of talked about this one a little bit in our line moves video. So if you guys want to check it out on SportsLine. Big rivalry game here in the state of Washington. Early money, though, came in on the Cougars. We're seeing mostly 5s around town. I doubt I'm going to bet it, but we kind of talked about this a little bit. It's going to be a pretty good game in Pullman.
Yeah, it definitely should be. I like Washington a lot. I also like Colorado a lot, and I also like Washington State. So those are 3 teams, and then you throw out USC in there, even though they have 3 losses. I think the Pac-12 gets overlooked generally because they're on the West Coast, and there is an East Coast bias in a lot of these types of situations. But the Pac-12 is really good, and I don't think you should look down, obviously, on Washington for losing to USC. I don't think you should look down on the fact that Washington State lost on the road to Colorado. I think Washington State has Leach, their offense, Falk at quarterback. It's kind of gimmicky, but if they're in sync and in a rhythm, they easily could pull this upset off. I don't think that's really too much of a downgrade or a bad omen for Washington. Obviously, they're not going to make the college football playoff if they lose, but a 10-2 year is still fantastic. So there's just a lot of good Pac-12 teams. They're beating up on each other a little bit. As far as the line goes, I think it's back up to 5.5, 6. It's moved a ton from down to 4.5, back up to 5.5 to 4.5, now up to 5.5 or 6 even. That's right where I think the line will settle too. I'd be surprised if it got to 7 or if it went to a 3. So if you like a side, and it's Wazoo, which is probably the way I'm leaning, I would take 6. I don't think we're going to get much higher.
All right, number 6, USC, big upgrade for the Trojans, a whole 1.5. And I don't blame you. They did it again over UCLA. They beat the opening number and the closing number with ease. This week they play an Irish team, though, who's 4-7 on the season. I don't even want to get started on those guys, but do you think the Trojans can keep it rolling against kind of what we'll call a rivalry game?
Yeah, they absolutely should. And we had talked about on this show just last week. USC went into the Washington game stoked. Obviously expected to win that game. They did. They dominated. So then UCLA, it was the same story. I didn't think there was going to be much of a letdown. They covered pretty easily, and I think they gave UCLA the first 7 of the game. They gave them a head start. So this Trojans team, obviously, for real, I finally bumped them up. They deserved it. I've been bumping them up, and they'd creeped into the top 10 a few weeks ago, 9, 8. Now they're number 6. And I think they're actually, just barely behind Michigan and Clemson. So they're right there. There's not a team, to be honest, outside of Alabama, USC against anybody, I'd probably be picking the Trojans right now. They're playing the best football out of anyone. Notre Dame now getting on them. Their season's over. If they had won, not blown that lead against Virginia Tech, they have a shot at a bowl game. Now they don't, most likely. It's already been a disaster of a year. USC wants to keep this train rolling. If Utah does upset Colorado, they actually represent the Pac-12 South and potentially win the Pac-12 with a W there in that championship game. So USC is still playing for a lot. I'm surprised this number's at 17. And I had said earlier on that other video, if it went to 16.5, I'd bet it. And it just did it, like bookmaker Chris and a place here in Vegas. So under 16, under 17 at 16.5. I think it's a buy on the Trojans. This is going to be a play for me.
All right, number 5, Michigan. No change from last week. We talked about it, like you said, on this show. We learned there's definitely a difference between O'Korn and Spate under center. We'll get more into their matchup this week versus Ohio State in our next video, but no change on Michigan, even though they struggled against the Indiana team.
Yeah, it's no change since Wilton Spate's technically questionable. If he doesn't go, then obviously, the rating deserves to be where it is. They deserve to be 6.5 point underdogs. If he does play, I think that's a little too high, to be honest. Now the question is how healthy he'll be when he actually does play in the game. I ultimately think this game comes down to the defense because Michigan does have some strengths. The one is that defensively they're the best team that Ohio State's faced, period. Against teams like Michigan State, who haven't been great defensively, or teams like, I guess, Penn State or even Wisconsin some, or Indiana, JT Barrett struggles through the air. And if they're one-dimensional and they can only run the ball, like against Michigan State, he had to run it 24 times. I think he was only 10 of 22 passing for 86 yards. Michigan's going to take advantage of that. Michigan might not have to score many points with O'Korn or an injured Spate. 17 to 20 might get it done, if JT Barrett's struggling through the air. So I think it comes down to that. I don't think you should count Michigan out. I still think it'd be one of the we've been looking forward to it all year now. and I think we still should. Don't think that there's like some easy win now for the Buckeyes because Spate could potentially miss the game. Michigan's still good enough as a team to win this game.
All right, number 4, Clemson, 92.5 points, a little slight upgrade by half a point from last week. This week they play in-state rival South Carolina, but it really doesn't look like much of a rivalry game. The Tigers are 3.5 touchdown favorites. Looks like they need to get a big win over an SEC team, to stay in the top 4. I don't necessarily know if there's any danger of them dropping out of the top 4, but it could happen.
Yeah, it's surprising. I'm not sure they're going to drop out of the top 4 no matter what. If they went out, they should be there. I should have said I would be surprised if they did. They took care of Wake Forest. The number moved up towards them. I think it closed like 24. So that's why I upgraded them a little bit, downgraded Wake a little just because my numbers had it more like 22. I think they won the game by 23, so it was right around there. They're favored by a similar number here against South Carolina. Ultimately, I don't think Virginia Tech's good enough to give them a run in that ACC title game. So Clemson's going to be representing in that Final Four. But they're just not as good as they were last year. The offense hasn't looked as strong, which is kind of surprising. But more so defensively, they've been much worse. And, Alabama or whoever it is, Ohio State, potentially, they're going to take advantage of that. So I feel bad for Clemson fans because I know they want revenge from last year's loss. I don't think it's in the cards, but I think you'll get there.
All right, number 3, Louisville, 93 this week. You downgraded them a point for that horrible performance in Houston, and rightfully so. This week they play a little brother Kentucky, who hasn't won in this series since 2010 and has only covered 1 of the last 5. Preston, does Louisville take out some much-needed aggression on the Wildcats this week, or do we see them struggle against the number yet again?
You know what? That's a good way to put it. They need to get something off their chest for losing that game. But the problem is Houston's really good, and they'd had some weird games with an injured O-line and an injured Ward. But they also remember this is a team that beat Oklahoma outright pretty easily, similar fashion. Earlier in the year, they did it against Florida State in a bowl game last season. I just don't think Louisville much. They shouldn't be downgraded too much. Obviously, the fact that they were down was a 31-0, I think, in that first half. That's pretty telling. But I'm not going to downgrade them too much. I did downgrade them a little bit, but I backed Houston. That number got up to 17.5, and it didn't make sense. I thought it should be 13.5, 14. So we made a play and fortunately won. But I don't think it's a team like Louisville you should just automatically fade. But what are they playing for now? I mean, after all those losses the week prior, they had a shot at that Final Four in the playoff despite that loss to Clemson. And now with 2 losses, they certainly aren't going to be getting in. They're playing it's kind of a rivalry game, one that Kentucky hasn't won since 2010. And, this is probably the best Kentucky team we've seen in 4, 5, 6 years, especially offensively. And so I'll just say on this show now, right before we started recording, you asked, I needed a minute because I was sending out a play on a total. And it was actually the Kentucky-Louisville over 71 because I think they do get that aggression out. They score a ton. Lamar Jackson actually lit Kentucky up last year, much worse Lamar Jackson. And, Kentucky's offense, I think Louisville's kind of dead, and you might see that on the defensive side of the ball in this one. And I expect a lot of points. My number was up near, I think, 76 for the total. So that 71, I think, is too low. That's my play in this game. As far as the side goes, it would be Kentucky or nothing, just because I think they do keep up a little bit scoring the ball. But I'd be surprised if they went outright. I think it's up to like 25 and a half. I wouldn't expect that. I think Louisville does want the win. They want to maybe get a shot at sneaking into a New Year's Six bowl, or at least a former BCS style bowl. And so I don't think they're going to have a complete letdown.
All right, number 2, Ohio State, another half-point downgrade, and rightfully so. I thought the Buckeyes should have lost that game in East Lansing. We will talk more about their matchup versus Michigan in our next video, but any notes that you want to add on the Ohio State Buckeyes?
Yeah, I talked about them already, mostly with that Michigan spot. And, I downgraded Ohio State, obviously, off that Michigan State game. They also, the number closed lower than I had it, which was partly that I needed to upgrade Sparty a little bit more and downgrade Ohio State a little bit. And again, if they're one-dimensional, they're beatable by a lot of teams like Penn State and Michigan State. So I'm worried, Wisconsin took them to overtime similarly. I was worried originally that Alabama, this was kind of the one team that could beat them. They did it 2 years ago, and I have those futures on Alabama. I'm not so sure now. I think I'm feeling safe, which is never a good thing if you start feeling safe. So I wanted Sparty to get that 2-point conversion, but in the end, I think there's a huge tier from Ohio State and everybody else to number 1 Alabama.
All right, like you just said, number 1 Alabama still with 100 points. You can't upgrade them anymore.
Yeah,
Either
I
way,
could, I guess.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could give them another point, but I don't think they really deserve it. I think last week we saw them just not really care against the Chattanooga team, who looked pretty good in the first half against Alabama. I'm sure the Tide just had no interest in playing in that game. They've already won the SEC West. This week, though, they face a really scrappy Auburn team who's been pretty competitive in the Iron Bowl. 17 points is a lot of points, but this Bama team has consistently proven its dominance this season. I am not sure if I mean, I don't really lay big points. We already know that, but I'm not sure if I can really make a case for Auburn here.
Yeah, I don't think I could either. It was pretty evident that, in kind of going back to that Louisville, Kentucky game, it was evident Kentucky, similarly to this Chattanooga, Alabama, they were losing to Austin, PA, an 0-10 FCS school called Austin, PA. They were losing 13-0 at the end of that first quarter. It was evident Kentucky was looking ahead to Louisville. I think it was similarly evident that Alabama was looking at Auburn, and they were down to Chattanooga 3-0 after the first quarter as 48.5-point favorites. So I'm with you. I don't think you can really back Auburn. The number's pretty good. I think my number was 17.5. So there's not a ton of value. And this is just Alabama's season. No matter how many points they're laying, they just cover anyway. And I think they do it again. And this game kind of holds less significance now that Auburn lost that game to Georgia 2 weeks ago. It would have been for the SEC West, and it would have been for the SEC title appearance. Now, no matter what Alabama gets in, Auburn's not playing for as much other than the rivalry. I lean Alabama, especially if this creeps down under 17. But for now, I'll stay away.
All right, Preston, as always, thank you. Make sure you guys check out our other videos on sportsline.com.